Hi, I'm Keith Baker, and today I'm going to share about how you and I can understand concepts a little bit better. As usual, I have some caveats. Some simplifications will be made of rather sophisticated studies. If you want to know more details, the references will be listed on the bottom part of the slide. It has happened to me on more than one occasion that a faculty member would come to me and mention something about a young doctor not understanding some key concepts the way they would like them to. They also recognize that these people are smart, they've done the reading, and they understand basic information just fine. The question is, they're not putting it together quite the way they'd like them to, so other ways to help people put information together in a way that's more cogent and meaningful and correct. It turns out that people understand more deeply when they use a process called constructivism, and they use a process called collaborative discourse, which I'll explain, to make that happen. It really requires learners to justify and explain their understanding, and educators or people trying to help them clarify their understanding to listen for any misunderstandings and then discuss them with the person. I want to show you a very nice example of what happens in the mind of a human when they're hearing something or learning something. This cartoon is from a book called Fish is Fish, and it describes a scenario where a fish is hearing from his friend the tadpole, who grew up to be a frog, jumped out of the pond, and saw birds and was very excited and came back into the pond to describe for the fish what a bird looked like. So you can see here in this example, the fish right here is listening carefully to the tadpole, or now frog, describe what a bird looks like. You can see in the mind of the fish that what we have is basically a fish. Here's the fins here, here's the little tail over here, and so on. The fish is essentially taking it in his mind and creating a bird, but it's not a bird like you and I understand it. It's basically taking the prior knowledge of the fish, decorating it with this new information that's being brought into the mind of the fish, courtesy of the frog, who's describing what a bird looks like. And this fish is making sense of this information in a way that's actually not correct. But the frog has no way of knowing that. The frog thinks the fish is understanding everything that it says, when in fact that's not the case. So constructivism is this process, and it really maintains that people incorporate new information into their previous conceptions, and that they only will change how they realize and think about new information when it conflicts with their prior understanding, causing something known as cognitive dissonance. It's when in your mind you have a thought previously believed meeting a new perspective that's different than that, and when those two collide, that's very bothersome from humans, and it's called cognitive dissonance, meaning two thoughts in your mind that are not getting along with each other. That's very bothersome, and most people will try to make that get better by improving their understanding to make things jive or be synchronized, or they'll dismiss the new information, as often happens. Constructivism really defines a type of practice, or what are called exercises, that challenge previous conceptions of understanding and require the students to explain their thinking. While the frog is describing for the fish what a bird looks like, the frog thinks everything is fine because words are coming out of the frog's mouth, the fish is making sense of it. Unfortunately, it's not working out. So the question is, how do you find out what is in the mind, so to speak, of this fish to understand that what he's created here is not at all a bird, but rather it's a fish with wings? And this concept of explaining information creates something called elaborated knowledge. Elaborated knowledge is in contrast to something called inert knowledge. Inert knowledge are facts, they're lists of things, but they're meaningless. Inert knowledge would be like knowing vocabulary words for a foreign language, but being unable to speak the language. Elaborated knowledge is much more sophisticated knowledge. It has connections between the knowledge, there's information, it can be applied and used. So elaborated knowledge is really almost always what people want to have when they're learning something. I draw your attention to a couple of key words in this quote, which is from this paper by Hack right here. The key features are here in pink color. I have highlighted all of the relevant words I want you to key in on. This is all about individuals, 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 and individuals who are doing the learning. None of these words applies to the educator or teacher. Everything in constructivism has to do with what's going on in the mind of the learner, the one who is constructing the new reality, the new understanding, or making sense of information, or understanding a new concept. Everything is about what happens in the mind of that person. At the moment, you can see here our fish, in his mind or her mind, is making up something that is not correct. However, The person speaking to this fish has no idea that this is occurring. The educator thinks everything is fine, when in fact, that's not the case. So the question is, how do we get after that? And that really comes down to this concept of collaborative discourse, where when having a conversation, you can ask some questions to figure out what's in the mind of the learner to see if it's making sense. There are a variety of phrases or words you can use to promote constructivism, to expose the thinking of the person making sense of the information. You might ask somebody to explain why or why not. In doing so, in explaining that, you would understand a lot more about what that person thought. You might ask someone to explain how something worked. Particularly if they said something that didn't make sense to you, you could say, how does that work? And in their describing how it worked, you would understand what their perspective and what their thinking was like, because you would see how they've constructed their mental model. For example, if we were to apply that here to our fish down here, if we ask this fish right here, dear fish, what would you feel if you were to pet this new animal called a bird? This fish would say, oh, I would pet him here on his side and I would feel these nice scales. And at once you would realize that this fish has not made proper sense of what's been described, because you now know that birds don't have scales, they have feathers, so you would know right away that things weren't working out. You could also ask what other options exist. Another one that's very helpful is ask what if and then change the scenario to see if they make useful information and apply it in a way that's correct. You could ask for evidence that supports points or does not support a point or a perspective. I next want to show you the power of collaborative discourse, or discussing amongst one's peers about how things work. This study here was done with college students who are taking a college genetics course. The questions I'm going to show you are very difficult for anyone in the class. These are so difficult that only 10% or 11% of the students got them correct. So what we have here is a question number 1, a very difficult genetics question, which is answered by each of the people acting independently, sitting in the class doing one of these clicker questions. I draw your attention to this person here, the blue person. They are the only person in this cohort of 9 people who got it correct. That's how difficult the question is. Once that has happened, these people are all broken up into little groups of 3 people, 1 group, 2 groups, and 3 groups, and they're going to have what's called peer discussion. They're going to talk about question number 1 and discuss the answer. Now, mind you, no one has been told the answer. They are simply discussing what they as a group think the correct answer is and why. In the best of all circumstances, you would notice that the person here, the one blue person, would have shared the answer with these 2 other people right here. So ideally, within this group, all 3 would know the answer. These other 2 groups here have no one who got the correct answer, and so they would stay in the dark because no one knew the answer in the first place. So talking among themselves probably has no effect at all if things go according to this ideal way of looking at things. Now, once that's happened, they are going to be able to individually re-vote on question number 1. They're going to be given the exact same question, and each person has to answer the question for themselves. And as I've drawn out here, in the best of all worlds, this little pod here would all get it correct because they had the person who knew the answer. These pods down here would still get it wrong because no one knew the answer in the first place. In fact, when these people discussed this problem amongst themselves, the following is what happened. They were given what's called an isomorph, or question number 2, which relates to question 1 but is different. It's still an extremely difficult question that is just as hard as question 1, but you'll notice here now that a lot of people got this question right. It's still a very hard question, and not everybody got it correct, but look at this. 1, 2, 3 people, probably 3 new people got this question correct, even though they talked amongst themselves with others who did not know the answer to this question. So this is the power of collaborative discourse. Just talking amongst yourselves can actually help you understand things better. This concept of collaborative discourse is really most useful with very difficult material, not simple material. No one really needs help with simple stuff. It's this tough stuff where it's helpful. Another way to look at this is the percentage of students who gave the correct response. And we show here when question number 1 was given to these students, very few of them got it correct because it's so hard. After they have discussion amongst themselves in an ideal manner, this many would have got it correct if you do the math on who knew what. However, when we do the isomorph, which is basically a question number 1, except it's a little different, but technically it's just as hard as question 1, you'll see there's this substantial improvement in understanding just from this collaborative discourse. Now, in addition, this is an ideal response, so probably The real advantage is even bigger than the one I've drawn here. So collaborative discourse, talking amongst yourselves, working through things in your mind and clarifying how you understand things is quite helpful. I also want to show you how effective active learning is, another way of sort of construing constructivism. So active learning really works in a lot of different ways. What I want to show you is a very large cohort of people and how effective this is. There are lots of ways to do active learning, and I show some right here. Group problem solving, worksheets or tutorials completed during the class. One of my favorites is using personal response systems, and that is with or without peer instruction. As long as you do some thinking explicitly, actively thinking about the material, you get the benefit of this. And also studio or workshop course design. There are others too, but I just list these few. And amongst quite a few studies and quite a few college students, you can see on the average, the overall effect is half of a standard deviation. The concept here is asking students what they think as opposed to simply telling them and telling them and telling them. They must make sense of this material for themselves, otherwise it may not go in a way that's the way you had hoped. So when I want people to improve their understanding, then the following couple of tips can be used. When a learner makes a decision or expresses their understanding of something, ask them to explain how they made the decision. And here's the key, even if it's a sound or good decision, because when you do that, they will reveal their understanding, which can serve as a starting point for deeper conversations, or if something has gone amiss and the sense was made incorrectly, you can untangle it and work through a better understanding of the material. So either way, asking them to explain themselves is helpful. In addition, a very helpful way to have people expose how they're thinking so that the educator can see what things are looking like in the mind of the learner is this one right here. Ask a learner to explain a concept to somebody else and listen for appropriate understandings while they're explaining the concept. So for example, a resident could explain to the medical student, or the fellow could explain to the resident, and so forth and so on. Take a difficult concept, ask the one person to explain to the other, and listen to what they say. And you can use that as fodder for further explanations and untangling of concepts that are tangled up. Thanks so much for joining me on this short walk on the expert pathway. See you soon.